den rechten. Den rechten Teil an der Nordseite.
Moving forward.
Today I'm going to share with you the findings of my thesis work that I'm conducting in the Peri-urban University. And I'm looking at the coordination of regional rail policies and urban development policies in two French metropolitan areas, Toulouse and Nantes, looking at questions on how the regional network is proposed as an alternative mode of travel in metropolitan areas, and I'll look at how territories are organized around rail lines. Since after the Second World War, urban sprawl has been organized around the road infrastructure, and as the rail offer declined, we've seen a disconnect between the regional rail lines and urban development. Now the context is changing. On the one hand, since 2002, regions have invested heavily in the development of regional services, especially peri-urban services, and since the SRU Act and the Grenelle Act, there's been a change in the reference for urban development, and they're trying to promote consistency between development and transport with new policies. Developers are compelled to use rail and stations as a way to organize metropolitan territories for urban planning and travel. There are many surveys about rail-oriented urban planning with a twofold objective: to meet the demand for housing whilst limiting urban sprawl, but also promote the use of rail to restrict car travel. Now the question is whether there's been a change in urban development practices related to the rail network. I'm showing you one of my case studies in the Greater Toulouse. A few points of context. Toulouse has been widely studied by people working on the peri-urban. The Greater Toulouse has record levels of urban sprawl and car use. It's institutionally fragmented. There's been a delay in the rise of public transport. So far, urban planning and transport policies were very little correlated. But now the context is changing regarding rail. Since regionalization, the region has been very proactive, and there has been a lot more offer in the peri-urban area, but the metropolitan planning process that started in 2002 has identified rail as one of the ways to organize the territory. It's very visible in the development master plan for the Greater Toulouse, the central SCOT that sets floors in terms of urban density for urban regeneration and new builds in areas that are well served by public transport and that restricts development outside these corridors. Let's see what's going on in practice on the western corridor of the Greater Toulouse. It's interesting on many counts because there are diverse profiles of towns, dense urban to remote peri-urban. It's an area of population growth, mostly driven by the aeronautic business in Blagnac. And this rail line has partly urban fares on in Saint-Cyprien-Colomiers, the yellow stations, but since 2003 there's been an extension of the offer. Investment was made in the infrastructure, better timetables and schedules, and new stations were offered. I won't give you the history of this rail project, but this rail project that's peri-urban or peri-central is the outcome of a brand new arrangement between the joint economy syndicate for transport, and now after regionalization we have an authority in charge of urban transport and the region. Now there's a fairly good transport offering, but it's very inconsistent. Now this project is seen as a success. Passenger traffic increased fivefold, but there are qualifications, imbalances in the way the line works. In fact, integrated pricing only affects part of the line. There's a price wall, which means that most peri-urban users move to the first integrated station, Colomiers, which has a lot of impact in terms of operations and parking. And secondly, you may think that passenger traffic is not high enough given the investment made, and so things could be optimized. This project and the arrangement that it meant in terms of the institutional governance between the Transport Authority and the region was painful and still a matter of heated debate, especially when it comes to the functional and financial aspects, because it's a joint line between urban transport and rail transport. Has that had an impact on development practices, especially in the peri-urban area? Now, the towns with stations along this line have strong challenges in terms of densification, and local representatives are fairly sensitive to these issues. They want to integrate that in intercommunal processes, and so they promote local recommendations because that also meets their requirements, diversifying the housing offer, offering collective rentals, and so on. Local representatives have identified the station and the rail line as a strong benefit for the town, making it more attractive, but the station is seen mostly as a functionality, a transport offering, the performance of which needs to be improved, and most of the projects defended by the towns are here to increase parking size, promote better interconnectivity between the various modes of transport, but they are not thinking about urban planning surrounding the station. So in terms of urban projects, most of the work affects the denser part of the line, those that are covered by integrated pricing, defended by the Greater Toulouse grouping, but they haven't really thought about how to conduct urban regeneration around the stations. They mostly want to build extensions outside the areas that are within easy walking distance or cycling distance from the station. How to explain that? Well, the emergence of integrated projects greatly depends on the local context around the stations, the opportunities, and the ease of defending such a project. Stations are not well connected to the rest of the town, and so the relative location of the station to the city center will have an impact on development. And the local development strategy also have an impact. So when there's a project for residential densification around the station, there's no attempt to reconcile urban planning and transport. And so it is at the nexus of several factors, especially the dissemination of new development standards, demographic changes in peri-urban spaces, trying to offer more diverse housing and optimized project. Development strategies mostly change to offer better space and time control of peri-urban spaces, but not here to promote the use of the rail network. However, beyond these general observations, there are diverse development practices very quickly here. For instance, the town of Brax, here there's a certain opportunistic convergence between town interests and the orientations of the master plan. It has started a process of urban regeneration near the station, but it's mostly a compromise between ambitions to build collective housing to retain young people in the town, and also geographic constraints, very few land reserves, and financial constraints. At the opposite end, Pibrac has a large territory and a lot of land available, and so most of the new extension areas are south of the town, near the road links, and rail is here to support urban development. For instance, the town wants to create a new station. And Méranviel is a specific context, it's a very rural peri-urban context, and the integration of the station is mostly seen to promote better access, but this is a town which is part of a controlled development territory according to the master plan. 90% of urban growth should be in the denser areas, and so the remaining towns should share the last 20%. And here the station is a negotiation lever between the master plan and these peri-urban towns to have more building rights. So this shows that setting the rail network as an alternative for transport raises the issue of how the rail offering is designed. But although this is important, it has an impact on the emergence of urban projects around stations. Now people are thinking about how to build a tram train, how to extend the integrated rates, but this raises funding issues because it all has a cost, and it also raises coordination issues between the transport authority and the region. Now, in peri-urban territories, there's potential to increase the value of land around stations, but the rise of projects hits the wall of old projects. Now it's possible that the urban community may have a single grouped master plan, and so there may be a special contract between the municipalities to do things in common. Now, beyond the case study, what can we learn about the way that rail links can have in organizing urban development? Maybe they can be levers for new structure in peri-urban territories, but we have doubts about it. You may think about denser urban projects, but people tend to overestimate the potential, and very often this ambition on the part of developers is up against the territories that resist change. Then how to support change, something that public policy and developers want to do? And the example that was studied shows the emergence, the limitations of a very normative process where master plans simply set density ceilings. These are complex projects, and so it's necessary to think about how to help these towns develop their own engineering projects, and some towns have implemented very innovative tools. Then how can the rail offering be an answer to peri-urban mobility challenges? There's the rise of cooperation between organizing authorities, but not only. For instance, the Transilien director wrote a paper asking for less densification around stations because the network can't cope with the increase in passenger traffic. But since there are rarer and scarce public resources, this is not just for the Paris region. In the south of France, the transport director says that any additional passenger costs a lot of money, and so the network cannot cope, and so urban densification around stations is not necessarily a good idea. So who pays, and what are the effects of improving the rail offering on urban sprawl? These effects are not really measured, especially the ability that households have to move further away, especially when you improve connectivity with the stations. A radio-concentric network will not improve the center-periphery modes of operation and densify around the corridor. Now, what happens outside this corridor? We saw this morning that proposals were made for these in-between spaces. You can't bet everything on rail, so what about low-density areas? And the polarization principle for urban and economic development in areas with good service supposes that you will limit urban development in these areas that don't have good service. Now, what about these towns? They want to be able to develop, and this principle of polarization is only acceptable if there's inter-town solidarity, which is something that still remains to be built. Thank you. Thank you, Juliette Maulat. It was pretty surprising to learn, thanks to you, that there are local representatives who may complain about the difficulties that the extension of collective transport network mean for them. Yes, it's true. It does happen. These mayors are being realistic, and they say that, yes, it's very costly, and you can't solve everything with rail, and so elected officials are not just people who think wrong and who think only with their feet. No, these are your own words. I'll let you take responsibility for this assumption. That wasn't what I meant. But anyway, does that mean that elected local officials, those that you are referring to, would they like the SNCF to do more beyond the infrastructure that it is in charge of station? Maybe it could help support urban developments, which, according to this mayor, should go hand in hand with the development of stations? What do you mean? Your mayors say that it's all well and good to have stations and a growing corridor, but that forces us to make investment that we can't cope with. That was the regional vice president. Yes. Okay. So maybe does that man... Is it a good idea to ask SNCF to help finance what the regional vice president thinks is necessary to support the development of the rail link? Well, maybe he would like SNCF to offer a TER service, a regional train service that's cheaper. And now, regarding support for urban projects, there are regions which, as part of their territorial policy that they have with towns and groupings of towns, support change and fund studies, for instance, on transport hubs. So, for instance, a region can ask for rail land to be sold a little cheaper, land owned by the SNCF, but maybe not ask SNCF to conduct urban projects. Well, maybe they're not the best, the most competent for urban development. Yes, but they could be involved in the funding. Anyway, that means an awful lot of players, and this is not the first time since the beginning of this day that we've been faced with such a plurality of players, and so which means a lot of governance issues.
Den Rechten.